So let's talk about Exmos. This is going to be a hot take for sure. So this video is 6 years in the making. It's not one that I make, just knee-jerk reaction to a post. These are thoughts I've had for a long time. And I thought about making this video when I got this comment from Steve Henderson, who's a follower. He has good questions, but he says, I watch Exmo content all the time and they're not wrong, but just have a different perspective, which could feel like an attack to members. Everyone is trying to share their version of what's true. And when I read that video, I realized that sometimes we try to sugarcoat things that aren't true. That statement is not true. Now, let's get some things out of the way first. Let's define what an Exmo is. So an Exmo isn't just everybody who's left the church. Exmos are a group of people who hate the church and its members. I estimate that to be about 10 to 15% of people who no longer go to church fit in that bucket. The other 85%, another video, another discussion, but most of the people I know who've left the church still have fond memories and appreciate the church and still love its members and treat them with that type of respect. And I know to some that sounds like a harsh definition, but it's well earned. So there are three core behaviors that you see that fulfills that hateful behavior. And if you do any one of these three, right, you fit that Exmo bucket. Exmos are also very proactive in their disdain for the church. They get their names removed, things like that. It is they just do not like the church, and these are those behaviors. So 3 buckets, here we go. So first and foremost, anybody who has professed to have been a former member of the church, was active, and even had gone to the temple, knows one thing, and one thing that this is a line you can't cross. And if you do, right, it mimics that hateful behavior, and that's the temple. The church has asked, and members asked, that people respect what happens inside that we don't disrespect it, and we don't, desecrate the stuff that happens in the temple. So when you see an Exmo sitting in temple clothes and garments, and over the last 6 years, there's been waves of trends that they've done that some are just horrible. I remember there's a creator, Faith, who I love her content. She was about to go on her mission and go through the temple, and it was a time when Exmos were just doing bad things in temple clothing on TikTok. And I remember this very passionate video she made where she was like, this was going to be my special day where I get to experience this for the first time. And you ruined it for me because of this ridiculous and hateful behavior that you guys are doing. And so I can still hear her voice in my head, just the hurt from these actions. So yeah, anybody who desecrates what happens and disrespects what happens in the temple, that's just hateful behavior. You wouldn't do it for any other religion. You definitely wouldn't do it for any race or orientation if they asked you not to do it. So you shouldn't do it in this instance. Number 2, and probably worse than number 1, is the bullying of our youth. So in the early days of TikTok, and this is why the Bomb Squad was created, we're actually not a group. We're actually the oldest and longest running LDS content creator group. Our whole purpose and mission is just to help our youth, especially in the early days, help them deal with bullies, trolls, and answer questions that came up. That was our whole goal from this account. And the amount of bullying and trolling that we've seen from grown adults. So if it's teenagers arguing and doing that, a little bit more leeway. But when you have adults that are 30 plus years old, 40, 50-year-old, typically men, harassing young LDS content creators who are typically women or young women or girls, how else do you take that? We're not talking about asking questions. We're talking about bullying. If you don't know what bullying is, just go do the Google. But bullying, saying disgusting things, and there are plenty of our followers who were in this group who felt that hatred in the early days. The early days on TikTok was horrific. It's gotten better because there's a lot more LDS content creators here to help protect, but yeah, horrific. Also, a shout out to our youth who, when they were getting bullied, the easy thing would have been to actually just destroy these bullies by making funny content, but they never did. They took the high road, which is really, shows the level of maturity these teens had at the time. Third behavior that fits that bucket of hateful behavior towards members of the church and the church itself is, going back to Steve's comment, like sharing your experience in the church, that's your right. As a matter of fact, you have every right to express whatever opinions you want. That's fine. But once you get into the discussion of the church, its doctrines, its teachings, and you're wrong often, and you're making content for the public, whether it's ignorance or just flat out knowingly lying, that behavior is unacceptable, because you wouldn't do it if you were talking about a race or an orientation. And in this country, religion is just as protected as other groups. And so if you're going to go on TikTok and be incorrect and the biggest issue for me is the lack of awareness to correct and apologize when you get something wrong. They don't care. And I think what's the hardest thing about, the Exmo community is that they rarely, if ever, police themselves. So, for example, there have been some pretty horrific temple videos and other content, and rarely do you ever see anyone in the comments going, you know what, guys, this isn't cool. I've got friends and family who are still members who this would be pretty hurtful. Nope, they just all high-five each other and think it's awesome, which, is the thing that really kind of pushes it over the edge of, and I've had them tell me that they don't care that what they're doing is bigotry, because their hate towards the church is so strong. So what do you do? What do you do when you run into Exmos? Or what is my recommendation? So we try not to engage with the Exmo community because it's fruitless. So our 2 or 3 big recommendations are, first, foremost, don't engage, because once you engage, the algorithm will send you more. But the best way to help avoid a lot of that is to use your filters. So if you don't know how to filter, just put something in the comments. I'll make a video on it. But basically, you can go into your filtering process and you can put in hashtags. So hashtag Exmo, hashtag Ex-Mormon, those type of things. And it really does help weed out a significant amount of that content. And then blocking. Right, so if you're starting to see a content creator that is in the Exmo community that you don't want to see, just block them. We block all the time. A lot of times people feel weird about that kind of stuff, but if you Google on how to have a healthy relationship with your social media platforms and how to deal with trolls and bullies and things like that, the first thing that they always say is block, and block liberally, because you need to cultivate the experience you want, not what other people think you should have. And that's the biggest mistake most people make when they get on social media, thinking that they owe a total stranger some type of right, but they don't. You don't. If you want to block somebody for whatever reason, go right ahead. That is what's 100% recommended. One of the last things I want to say on this is a lot of times people will say, well, it goes both ways. And this is why I wanted to make this one of the big reasons I want to make this video. It doesn't go both ways. In no way, shape, or form do LDS content creators make the same hateful content towards Exmos. They just don't. They don't. Matter of fact, the easy way to just go out and prove this out is go into the TikTok search function, type in hashtag LDS or hashtag Mormon, and it would take you a long time to find 5 examples of LDS content creators hating on Exmos the way they hate on us, right? You would have a hard time. Now, if you go in and type in hashtag Exmo, in less than 10 minutes, you probably get 30, 40, 50 examples of things that you're like, this is pretty far over the line. And that's what I think is the most hurtful is, just the lack of, you know what, guys, let's just, let's speak our experience, our truth, but let's stay away from these things that are really not honest. One of my favorite stories is from actually an evangelical leader who listened to a talk from a member about, Mormons. And he said a couple good things, but a lot of the stuff he said wasn't accurate. And afterwards I went up and said, hey, you got a couple things wrong. And the speaker said, yeah, we're in a war, we're in a battle, we've got to win. And he said, but we have to lie and be deceitful? That doesn't make sense. Have a good one.